Stop what you are doing. Put down the remote. Forget the sanitized press briefings coming out of Washington and London this morning. What I am about to show you is not a localized conflict. It is not a contained retaliation. Over the last 24 hours, the global architecture of deterrence did not just crack. It completely collapsed. Look at the raw data from the overnight strikes of March 21st and 22nd, 2026. Right now, the mainstream networks are heavily focused on the noise. They want you looking at the political theater. They want you debating the talking points. But they are desperately trying to distract you from the math. And the math is unforgiving because it is entirely emotionless. While you were sleeping, a ballistic missile traveled 4,000 kilometers across the ocean. It bypassed multiple early warning systems to strike the United States and British military installation at Diego Garcia. 4,000 kilometers. Let that distance sink in. Simultaneously, the global price of Brent crude oil violently breached $119 a barrel. These are not two isolated events. They are the exact same kinetic chain reaction, a reaction that is already mutating, and it is about to hit your wallet, your local supply chain, and your absolute sense of domestic security. I am going to walk you through three undeniable realities that the intelligence community and the financial elite are currently trying to manage behind closed doors. We are going to look at the unprecedented mathematical failure of an ironclad defense grid. We are going to track the immediate systemic hemorrhage of the global energy market. And finally, we will expose the geopolitical lie being sold to the public to cover it all up. That is development number one, which brings us to the kinetic reality on the ground, overnight. March 21st and 22nd, 2026. The most sophisticated multi-layered air defense grid on the planet buckled under sustained saturation. For years, the public has been told that the interlocking systems of Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow interceptors formed an impenetrable shield. But physics is a brutal equalizer. If you fire enough projectiles simultaneously, the mathematical capacity of the interceptor computers is overwhelmed. The grid saturates. The shield breaks. According to operational reports confirmed by the Israel Defense Forces and cross-referenced by The Guardian, Iranian ballistic missiles successfully breached the airspace. They did not just hit empty sand. They bypassed the standard urban targets to directly strike the southern cities of Arad and Dimona. Let us pause on those specific coordinates. Dimona. If you understand military geography, that name triggers an immediate clinical alarm. Dimona is the immediate perimeter of Israel's Negev Desert Nuclear Center. This is the absolute core of their strategic deterrence. This was not a random barrage. This was a calculated, precision demonstration of payload delivery. By striking the civilian infrastructure immediately adjacent to the nuclear facility, the message was delivered with surgical, cold precision. They demonstrated the capability to penetrate the ultimate nuclear shield. The subtext is clear, written in the craters of the Negev. If we can hit the perimeter, we can hit the core. It is brinkmanship engineered to the exact millimeter. Simultaneously, the violence decentralized into the civilian sectors. A cluster bomb detonated in the urban density of Tel Aviv. Cluster munitions are a very specific type of kinetic asset. They are not designed to penetrate hardened military bunkers. They are designed to open in midair and scatter hundreds of lethal bomblets over a wide area, maximizing soft target devastation. 15 people were immediately injured by those scattered bomblets in that specific blast radius. The total casualty count inside Israel has now surged to at least 180 wounded. 180 human beings shredded by shrapnel and blast waves, while the politicians traded carefully crafted sound bites on television. But the scope of this operation did not stop at the Mediterranean Sea. The perimeter of this conflict just expanded exponentially. 6 rockets hammered a United States diplomatic and logistics center at the Baghdad airport, a fact formally documented by the Iraqi security media cell. A localized strike, a standard harassment tactic. But then came the strategic paradigm shift, the true wake-up call for the Pentagon. 2 ballistic missiles were fired at the joint U.S.-British military staging ground at Diego Garcia. Let me translate the strategic geography of that strike for you. Diego Garcia is an atoll located deep in the Indian Ocean. Historically, it has been the untouchable sanctuary for American strategic bombers, nuclear submarines, and naval logistics fleets. It is the absolute logistical spine of Western power projection in the Eastern Hemisphere. The UK Ministry of Defence had to officially acknowledge the unthinkable. The incoming projectiles traveled 4,000 kilometers. That is 2,500 miles. This is the deep dive you will not hear discussed by the talking heads on the evening news. A 4,000-kilometer strike radius means the United States military no longer possesses a safe rear echelon in the entire region. The era of launching multi-billion-dollar bombers from an untouchable sanctuary is statistically over. If an adversary can drop a warhead on Diego Garcia, every single floating asset, every runway, every fuel depot, and every radar dome within a 4,000-kilometer radius is now officially on the kill board. The umbrella of American invulnerability was just pierced by cold, hard mathematics. And how did the political class respond to this monumental shift in global deterrence? Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stepped to the microphone and declared, "We are going after the regime." A standard, predictable escalation of rhetoric, a promise of total war. But the counterstatement from the official Iranian military spokesperson, broadcast directly via their state media, is what requires your absolute undivided attention. They stated, "Iran will irreversibly destroy essential infrastructure across the Middle East if the U.S. attacks its energy sites." Listen to that quote again. Irreversibly destroy essential infrastructure. Notice the surgical absence of military targets in that threat. They are not threatening to sink an aircraft carrier. They are not threatening to storm a base. They are threatening to turn off the lights. They are explicitly targeting the vascular system of the global economy. Power plants, desalination facilities, deep water ports, refineries. They are weaponizing the extreme fragility of the modern interconnected world. The term irreversible is the anchor here. In intelligence and military logistics assessments, an irreversible strike means the catastrophic destruction of custom-built, highly specialized industrial hardware, massive turbines, petroleum cracking towers, high-pressure pipeline junctions that take years, not months, to manufacture and replace. They are essentially holding the 21st century hostage. If Washington and Tel Aviv proceed with their kinetic doctrine, the counterstrike will not just be military. It will be an industrial lobotomy of the entire Middle East. They are promising to send the region back to the pre-industrial age, dragging the rest of the civilized world down with it. But the kinetic strike was just the beginning. The real bleeding started when the markets opened. Look at the Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow choke point of water, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest section. It dictates the survival of the Western economy. And as of this morning, it is functionally paralyzed. 20% of the world's total oil supply flows through that specific corridor. 20%. When you clamp shut the primary artery of global energy, the mathematical reaction is violent and immediate. In the first few hours of trading, Brent crude rocketed toward $119 per barrel. Across the Atlantic, European natural gas prices surged by a massive 35%. The political class will step to the podium and tell you this is a temporary market fluctuation. They will tell you to remain calm. They are lying to you. This is not a fluctuation. The global supply chain is actively collapsing in real time. Look at the maritime shipping logs. 6 massive fuel ships bound for Australia were abruptly canceled off the board. They were simply erased from the transit registry. The energy is not moving because the insurance premiums for maritime transport have become mathematically impossible to underwrite. But the true scale of the catastrophe is structural. Look at Qatar Energy. They were forced to confirm that the overnight Iranian missile strikes caused what they clinically described as sizable fires. That is the sanitized corporate terminology for industrial devastation. Those strikes wiped out nearly 1/5 of their entire natural gas capacity. Let me translate that into raw economic reality. You do not rebuild a liquefied natural gas terminal in a week. You do not patch a high-pressure cryogenic refining node with duct tape and good intentions. That is highly specialized, custom-engineered infrastructure. When 20% of that capacity burns to the ground, it is offline for years. Years. This means the structural deficit in global energy is now locked in. The inflation you are about to experience is not a geopolitical ripple. It is a permanent shift in your cost of living. $119 a barrel is not just the price of gasoline for your commute. It is the cost of diesel for the trucks that deliver your groceries. It is the cost of the petroleum-based fertilizer used to grow your food. It is the cost of every piece of plastic, every pharmaceutical, and every manufactured good in your home. The war just reached into your bank account, and it is not leaving. But the threat is no longer confined to your wallet. The kinetic war is hunting civilian targets globally, and the oceans are no longer safe for commerce. A commercial vessel was just struck by an unidentified projectile off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. The open water is now a free fire zone. Which brings us to the Homeland breach. The most terrifying intelligence assessment of the past 24 hours did not come from the Pentagon. It came from Kyiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a stark domestic warning to Western allies. He stated on the record that Europe must immediately prepare for domestic drone strikes by terrorists and criminals. Let that warning sink in. Zelensky is not talking about military front lines. He is talking about your neighborhood. He is acknowledging that the proliferation of cheap, lethal drone technology has officially erased the concept of traditional borders. For decades, the United States and Europe relied on multi-billion-dollar early warning radar systems, Patriot missile batteries, and vast oceans to keep the homeland secure. Those systems are designed to track intercontinental ballistic missiles and fighter jets. They are functionally blind to a piece of commercial plastic flying at treetop level. A state actor is no longer required to execute a precision strike on a power substation in Ohio, a water treatment plant in London, or a localized communication hub. The technology to cripple domestic infrastructure is now open source. It is easily assembled from off-the-shelf civilian components, costs less than a used car, and can be deployed from the trunk of a rental vehicle parked 3 miles away. The asymmetrical warfare that defined the battlefields of Eastern Europe and the Middle East has bypassed customs. The barrier to entry for mass disruption is now zero. The conflict is no longer happening over there. It is already inside the perimeter. That is the absolute reality on the ground and in the markets. But 6,000 miles away in Washington, a completely different story is being spun. Let us examine the public narrative. The administration is currently projecting an image of absolute overwhelming control. The President of the United States just issued a strict 48-hour ultimatum to Tehran. The stated condition: reopen the Strait of Hormuz immediately, or the United States military will, quote, hit and obliterate Iranian power plants, starting with the biggest one first. It is a declaration designed to sound resolute. It is designed for primetime cable television to reassure a panicking market. But intelligence analysis does not run on press releases. It runs on data. And the data exposes a jarring, undeniable contradiction. At the exact same moment the Pentagon was supposedly preparing to execute this apocalyptic strike package, President Donald Trump posted a completely different reality on his Truth Social platform. He stated that he is actively considering winding down military operations. His exact words: "We are getting very close to meeting our objectives." Read that again. You do not threaten to vaporize a sovereign nation's foundational power grid while simultaneously claiming the mission is accomplished and prepping a rapid exit strategy. Not a grand, multidimensional chess game, not a master plan, not a calculated deception. This is pure, unadulterated panic. This is an administration trapped between two terminal scenarios. On one side, a catastrophic military escalation that will trigger the irreversible destruction of the Middle Eastern energy grid we discussed earlier. On the other side, a catastrophic domestic inflation crisis that will wipe out the middle class. They are bluffing with an empty hand, desperately trying to tweet their way out of a mathematical corner. They know they cannot afford the kinetic war because the American voter cannot survive the resulting economic shockwave at the pump. Which brings us to the second, more grotesque collision of realities: the quiet, backroom betrayal. While Washington and Tel Aviv are locked in this high-stakes standoff with Tehran, we must ask the fundamental intelligence question: who is actually profiting? Follow the money. Look away from the Middle East and look directly at Eastern Europe. Because the Strait of Hormuz is functionally paralyzed, global oil prices are skyrocketing. To prevent a total catastrophic collapse of the domestic American economy, the United States government just made a highly controversial, utterly cynical maneuver. They are moving to roll back Russian oil sanctions. Not a leak, not an anonymous rumor. This is the documented policy shift happening right now. To artificially suppress the soaring cost of gasoline for the American consumer, Washington is quietly unlocking the back door for Moscow. They are deliberately overriding years of international financial blockades. Let me show you the receipt for this transaction. Due to this Middle East oil squeeze and the subsequent easing of restrictions, the Russian Federation has raked in a staggering 6 billion euros. That is 5 billion British pounds in just 14 days, a fortnight. To put that number into perspective, 6 billion euros is not just state revenue. It is the lifeblood of a war economy. It pays for artillery shells. It pays for hypersonic missiles. It pays for the very same drone technology that President Zelensky just warned is coming to European cities. Every single time the price of a barrel of oil spikes because of a missile over the Negev desert, a Russian munitions factory gets fully funded. The situation is so blatantly transactional that British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had to break diplomatic protocol and issue an explicit, desperate public warning. He stated clearly that this Gulf War cannot become a windfall for Putin. He is watching his primary military ally dismantle the economic siege against Russia overnight. Let us strip away the diplomatic pleasantries and call this exactly what it is. By rolling back Russian oil sanctions to save the American pump prices, Washington is effectively sacrificing the survival of Ukraine to fund a completely different war. You have spent years listening to the political class lecture the public about the sacred duty to defend democracy in Kyiv. You have watched billions of your tax dollars flow into Eastern Europe under the promise of weakening the Russian military apparatus. And in less than 24 hours, because a single strait in the Middle East was threatened, that entire moral crusade was liquidated. The Grand Alliance was sold out for cheaper crude oil. They are taking the money meant to choke the Russian war machine and handing it directly back to Vladimir Putin, just to keep the lights on in American suburbs and keep the political polling numbers from imploding. It is a zero-sum game of geopolitical survival. The elite are selling out their allies to cover up their own strategic failures, and they expect you to simply watch the explosions on television and ignore the ledger. Which brings us to the final, unseen cost of this equation. Forget the geopolitics, forget the price of Brent crude, forget the deterrence grids and the electoral math in Washington. Strip all of the political theater away and look at the bare physical reality on the ground in southern Israel. Beneath the sterile academic rhetoric of regime change and nuclear posturing, kinetic energy must eventually transfer into physical matter. When a ballistic projectile reaches its terminal velocity and makes impact, it does not distinguish between a hardened military bunker and a civilian residential block. The physics of the explosion are completely blind. The shockwave shatters reinforced concrete into dust. The sheer thermal force turns everyday architecture into lethal projectiles. Look exactly at the coordinates of Arad and Dimona. These are urban centers existing literally in the shadow of a nuclear facility. They are functioning as the inadvertent human shields in a superpower standoff over a maritime strait they have never seen and over geopolitical policies they cannot comprehend. When the emergency responders and rescue grids mobilized and dug through the impact zones yesterday morning, they were not recovering compromised strategic assets. They were meticulously moving heavy layers of pulverized stone, shattered asphalt, and twisted steel rebars. From beneath the weight of that collapsed architecture, they pulled out a 12-year-old boy. A few meters away, from a separate localized impact zone, they extracted a 5-year-old girl. They are not abstract data points on a Pentagon briefing slide. They are biological reality, subjected to the blunt, overwhelming force of military-grade explosives. Both of these individuals are currently lying in a sterile hospital ward, medically classified in serious, highly unstable condition. 2 children. Processed as standard collateral damage on the vast, unforgiving ledger of global empires.